Thank you very much. I'm very glad to be here in good company, especially after the talk of this morning, speaking of the war, because it's very important in my approach to psychosis and trauma. I was born during the war, and I think that's what made me a psychoanalyst for those issues. I want to tell you about the conflict of memory. Listening this morning, I was feeling that there was a war of memory, and sometimes the director of the museums have to resign on that war of memories. The war between a memory which is inscribed in the past, with items, with a narrative, with a historical story which can change evolve with the time, but which is written. And another memory, which we call traumatic memory, which has no past, no future, which happens in the present time, even if the event happened decades ago or even centuries ago. And that memory, the major factor is time, and it's very, very difficult and very exploding to work with an arrested time. And that's what we deal with, working with patients who have or a traumatic history or a psychotic history. We, at the beginning, well, they trust us, as you say. They trust museums. They trust because they are happy to find somebody who listens, who is where they can be heard. And suddenly, without any that's my experience. Suddenly, without any anticipation, they attack you. And you become Hitler, Stalin, I have been Mengele. You become the huge agency, ruthless agency, which triggered the traumatic experience. So I considered madness as a combat, fight against those ruthless agencies on the intergenerational lines. Could be the grandparents who have been in such catastrophic areas, or the parents, or even the patient who has been raped. This ruthless agency can be political, well, it is always political, but at a big scale or at the little scale of a child. And this happens in the present time of the session, which is always the most difficult issue. I will give you an example. I did not prepare, while I hear those talks, stories came to my mind. One I will tell you. I have to tell you that psychoanalysts of psychosis and trauma usually do not create schools. They are individuals. And the pioneers of them have been trained, I could say, during the First World War, at the contact of veteran soldiers coming back. So I'll tell you just a story of that explosion, like it exploded in Ontario for this well-meaning director of museum, or it explodes to your face. But hopefully we can deal with that, transform this critical moment into something as a story. I tell you the story. The story is one of my first patients who was, I was a young analyst, started working in the asylums, although I was not a psychologist nor psychiatrist, but I had to work in the asylum. I think it was a consequence of the war. And so I was familiar with psychotic people. She came to my office, escaping from her own psychiatric hospital. I don't know who gave her my name. And she was livid, white like the sheet. And she just said, that she was out of the world. She was a biologist, she had 2 children, and she repeatedly go back to the hospital. And I asked her, what are you looking for in this hospital? And she answered, my mother, who was arrested under my eyes when I was 4 by the militia, French militia, and deported to Auschwitz. And she said, I was told, your mother won't come back, so I waited for her. They never told me she had died. So she went to the hospital among the ghosts, looking for her among the ghosts. So I asked her, I was very Lacanian at that moment, to tell me about all the circumstances which brought her to the hospital. At every time, the word commune was coming back. She was living first time in a community, second time a commuter or electric commuter, something happened, exploding a device. Third, well, this word, and as I was a Lacanian and trained in the Lacanian school, I thought, oh, that's a signifier. It was not. But I told her, look, there is this word coming back at each time. And then she said to me, right like that, my mother was said to be arrested as a communist. She was a communist. But I, the little girl, the only witness, knew she was arrested as a Jew. And it was the first time that this truth, historical truth, could be delivered to me, to another. I say, after it was the end, I said goodbye. She was pink. Her cheeks were pink when she went. She didn't say much, so I wondered if she would come back. She did come back. After that, I made a dream. But at that time, I never told my dreams to my patients. Now I would do it, because it's a dream. It's like a creation in between us to reach her. I was in a house where there was a pool inside the house. In French, we say bassin. Bassin is like a pool, but it's the word also for the womb. And there was a baby drowned, my son, who was just born. I took him. I was making respiration through the mouth, and his cheeks became pink. I quickly understood what it meant. I was in the womb of my mother when she was in prison, prisoner of the Germans, and where she almost took the train to Auschwitz, but she didn't. She was not Jewish, and she never talked about it. Her hair became white. That's all what was shown. So for me, it was a big, big discovery that the story, the trauma of this woman triggered in me my history, which was for me normal. Until then, I thought normal to be in prison in the womb of your mother. It had been said like a normal thing. So she made me connect with my own history in the Alps during the war, where my parents were in the resistance network, and where it was a combat zone during the whole war. So I was stunned that I was not neutral. You know, like an analyst has to be neutral, don't connect too much, but this was massive. She came back. She had left the hospital, took back her research, was close to her children again, and that went perhaps during 5 years. We saw each other regularly. Then, and that is the point which was triggered by your stories with the museums. Then, suddenly, she went back to the hospital, and the boss, the director of the hospital, phoned to me. I did not know him, he did not know me, and said, look, Don't do analysis with this patient. You are putting her in jeopardy. You are making her psychotic. You are, and so on. Her diagnosis had changed in between. At first, she was schizophrenic, and now she was bipolar, he said. And I was like that. And I just said, could you please let her come to her session? And he said, okay. I was so stunned. When she arrived, I regretted that he had released her. I saw coming in my office an old Jewish woman shouting to me that I was Mengele. I had done experiments on her. I was, and I cannot tell you because I was, again, completely, not terrorized, but numb. And quickly, I told her, I don't remember very well what I said, I am seeing your mother. Your mother, this old Jewish woman, who is not the heroine that the Communist Party celebrates every year, but who is full of wrath and anger, and who attacks her perpetrators. But I tell you, I know I am a young analyst. Perhaps I don't know what I do very well, but I did not experiment on you. I did experiences with you, with your consent, and you saw when I fail, when I'm better, when you are testing me all the time. I know you observe me. She's the scientist. She's the researcher. I am her co-researcher. That's what I said. She went away. I did not know how she took that. She came back very well, and that was over. I saw her a little more, and then she left. And I tell you this story because I received a phone call last year. I always wondered what happened to her. I make it short because I saw her sometimes, but I make it short. She said to me, I have written the book of my life. Oh, I say, wonderful. Send it to me, and I received it. To my dismay, she does not mention our work at all. She writes the different events of her life, how she realized that she was a Jew, how important it was, how, and so and so. But she never mentioned our work together. I was upset, I must say. And then, thinking of it, because I wanted to talk to you, I had the solution. Those trauma, which are made of images, sensorial images, which are not put into words. Words are the symbolic chain. All the symbolic, in the case of traumas, is broken. That's why time cannot pass, because time is made of symbols. Symbols on that topic, on that area, does not work. So, the aim, I can say, psychosis is a mode of research. It's a very accurate research, looking for another. Because in this catastrophic area, there is no otherness at all, except that ruthless otherness without other, like Mengele. But we can have many figures of that. So there is no other. And the work is to build the trust. And to build the trust in another is to build it, to destroy it, to build it, to destroy it, like Freud described in the game of his little child, Fort and Da. The child whose mother, during the First World War, is absent, and he threw his poodle above his cradle, and he is very happy throwing it, and he retrieves it. Oh, Fort, Da. That is the game. Well, it's exactly like that in psychotherapy or analysis. The other is built, they trust you, and then test you and break you. And you have to be very, very persistent. That is your major quality. Not to take care of your own narcissism. If you are not good, you always feel not good. And even, and the aim is to write, to inscribe what can never be written because of, as you say this morning, falsification of truth, which is the law in those perverse systems, erasure of tracks, what happened didn't happen, also unburied corpses, ghosts, disappeared people, and so on. So, little by little, something is on the process to be written. That means to enter in a symbolic perspective with a reliable other who will be the public. Now, I come to your problem here, the public. And I want to tell you, oh yes, and I forget the conclusion of this first part, the aim, the purpose of a psychoanalysis of psychosis and trauma, paradoxically, is oblivion. The traumatic memory is without oblivion. People remember all details, and it cannot be forgotten. It was Bion, the psychoanalyst, English psychoanalyst, who was a veteran of First World War. He said he had that kind of traumatic memory of his war. He said you can remember only what you can forget. And that is the purpose. It's paradox. So that, speaking to you, I understood. Otherwise, I was so upset. Why she doesn't mention me? I was good with her. She just forgets. And that's good. Even our work, which was deposited in my office, is forgotten. And she can remember. Because on the phone, I told her, oh, do you remember our first session? Oh, she said, yes, I remember. But she does not need to keep it as present. Okay. Now, I gave her as a title of this talk, because this I had not thought of telling you. Whereof one cannot speak, thereof one cannot help showing. That is Wittgenstein saying. I was very inspired by his work. He was a veteran of the First World War. He wrote the sentence in the trenches, in the front, on the Austrian side. He wrote the last end of the Tractatus, the last sentence of the Tractatus Philosophicus, whereof one cannot speak, thereof one should stay silent. So, you see, you shall be heard. If you stay silent, what can be heard? That's why I chose that. And then he came back to Vienna. During 10 years, he was suicidal, violent, completely out of his wits, although he did good things, but he abandoned philosophy. Then he went back to Cambridge at the end of 29 and resumed philosophy, as he said, as a therapy. And he not wrote, but the spirit of his research in the investigations is, whereof one cannot speak, what cannot help showing what's happening. Like this woman who was blank like a ghost among the ghosts. She was showing something. So the problem is, to whom do you show? And you don't show first to the public. That is what I want to convey to you. One has not to hurry to show secrets to the public. It takes time to make them into a story. And of course, what is shown is, I'm going to tell you about another crazy person but not my patient, a very famous art historian, whom perhaps, probably you know, Aby Warburg. You know, he was a very, very famous art historian of the Renaissance. And he speaks, he became crazy during First World War, and he speaks about surviving images. Well, that is the Nachleben in German, so it's in, you cannot translate it, perhaps our, where is Catherine? Yeah.
I'm German, so I like your German word, actually.
Nachleben, so afterlife. So there are surviving images, could be visions, could be voices, could be some images encoded in the body, which are the only witness of the catastrophes. They survive chaos when there is no more subject of the talk, no more time running. There are those images. And I thought, for a museum, images are so important that how do we deal with them? Warburg became mad at the First World War. He became the big chief of the German armies, and he became more and more delusional, and he was confined after the war in the Binswanger clinic. Binswanger was a disciple of Freud. There is a correspondence between the two psychoanalysts, psychiatrists, where they don't believe, they don't trust his intelligence anymore. For them, he will never recover his intelligence, his scientific tools, and so on. They are pessimistic. What did he do when he was in that clinic? He was just shouting every morning that all the Jews would be exterminated. We are in 1922. What was his secret, I wondered? You know, where did that come from? It's not only a prophetic gift like that. Time stopped for him in the aftermath of the previous war, 1870, against the French. We lost the war, and we sent to Germany a lot of gold. That was in the treaty. And his family, the Warburg, were bankers, Jewish bankers. And for some reason, I never understand finance, the banks went bankrupt with the gold coming in massive way. And of course, the Jews started to be the guinea pig, no, the, how you say, le bouc émissaire, goat, scapegoat. The Jews, and Hannah Arendt dates at that time, for that time, the beginning not of anti-Semitism, but of massive anti-Semitism. And it started in Hamburg. And he was 13. So he taped a record of this history, and that came back in the 20s while Hitler was writing Mein Kampf in prison. So you see how time is a dimension which can be arrested and at the same time inform for the future. Of course, he was always shouting that he wanted to get out of that hell of the clinic. And his psychiatrist, Binswanger, said, okay, you can go out if you are able to make a talk, a conference, during 1 hour, just to test if he was clever enough. And I think his psychiatrist did not believe it was possible. But he did it, and he was healed. And he went out of the clinic, and he started his big atlas of images in his library in Hamburg, which is now the Warburg Institute in London, where there are researchers working on his own premises, still now. And it is just behind the British Museum. So what happened? I wondered what happened. Once I understood where his prophecy was coming from, I wondered what happened. How was it that he could pull himself together after having been so demented? He had another. So that's my first point. In order to be heard, before to be heard by the public, it's too far, it's too big, it's too general. You have to have another. That's what I said for my little story. You have to have another at your shoulder. This other at your shoulder, at his shoulder, was a student, Fritz Saxel, who was his disciple and who will become the director of the Warburg Institute in London later on. Fritz Saxel had been to had done fought during the First World War, so he knew what it was to stay at the shoulder of a comrade and of a professor, and he would bring him books. Each time he would bring him books, each vacation, and say, read, your intelligence is the same in your psychosis and in your scientific research. So he trusted his intelligence. And when this conference had to be put up, Fritz Saxel, the disciple, helped him to do it. And this conference is very famous. It's on the ritual of American Indians called Hopis. It's the ritual of the snake, where they dance during half an hour with a snake in their mouth, and after throw it in the desert, where it has the shape of the lightning and will bring rain. He had not assisted to this dance, but when he was in 1894, he had gone to America for the wedding of his brothers and had asked to visit the First Nations, as you say today, in order to see rituals that would be analogous to Greek rituals represented in his Renaissance art, but active and alive rituals. He was going to what he said, living archaeology. And that is what came back, 30 years after, in his conference. And what was the subject? It was to show a surviving shape, the threat, the snake as the threat of course, of death, that you take in your mouth, yet you take in the hands, and you are able to overcome it and put it into a symbolic ritual. And that was what he did through his conference. In his mouth, there was terror. He thought he was unable to do it. And he built a story, wonderful story, and he was healed afterward. So he died in 29. Okay. So what is the name of this other, this little other who is at your shoulder? The name is the origin of the word therapist. In Homer, Iliad, the word therapon means the second in combat, and a double meaning, the one who is charged with who has to do funeral duties, so that you don't rotten like without any symbol. So, for instance, Patroclus for Achilles, or vice versa. So, his disciple was his therapist, therapon, like we are. That is our main role with such patients. Now I will. So, in order to share secrets, you don't give away secrets to the public like that. even if it is testimonies like little writings. When I just have to mention to you, when I have some patients whose grandfathers went to First World War, I ask them, where did they fight? Oh, this is rubbish. This is old time. This doesn't exist. And some of them grasp in some cupboard, in some attic, some little booklets. Because those people, they write. Even if they don't know how to write, they make another write. And they bring and they throw it in my office. Look what this dummy wrote. And I take the little booklet and I start to read. And then the grandchild starts to cry. That occurs many times. So you can receive that kind of testimonies, but it has to go through the intermediary space of one another. Second, it takes a lot of time. To be heard takes a lot of time. You could see with this woman I talked in the first place. It has to go progress, regress, progress, explosion. And at each time, there is a new story to be told. And I will tell you about, now my second topic is to tell you about a film which has been made by Mieke Bal on one of my books, when she made our work with my patient be heard. But it took a long time to write that book. This book is called, the title of my book was Mother Folly, and she made a film called A Long History of Madness, which was shown in a museum. That's why I thought about it, in Finland, in Turku. And the curator was Mia Hanula. The title was Landscapes of Madness. So she did the film, and she did installations in a museum like she did in Munch. You say Munch or Munch? Munch. Museum in Oslo recently with another film, Mrs. B. But I think it was in 13, 14, I don't remember. It was in Turku. And I want to take to tell you about this film, because to tell you how it takes time to produce a writing or a film. It's not just not I write, I put it in the public. For me, it took, when I was with those patients in the asylum, I worked during 30 years in 3 asylums. And working, I love to work with the mad, because it's not always tragic. You very often laugh. They are very making fun of you. And at some point, at the same time, we were doing that weekly seminar in the École des Hautes Études en Sciences Sociales, where there were anthropologists, historians, sociologists. I was in sociology with Jean-Max Gaudillard, my husband. There were also linguists. There were all those, Derrida, Lévi-Strauss, historians were there. And we had to make a seminar every week. That was our duty. So we called it Madness and the Social Link. So it was on the two sides. And 1 year, it was 1 year Jean-Max, 1 year me. 1 year, I chose to work on the encounter between the fools during the Renaissance time and the Middle Age, and the fools today in the asylum. Because for me, there was a connection, and I did not know which. So I researched during 1 year and even more, and my first intuition was the book of Victor Hugo, which is about the fools in the Middle Age. Notre-Dame de Paris, the henchman of Notre Dame, is that the translation in English? You can say to me? There was a film about that. Okay, Notre-Dame de Paris, where it's about the medieval fools. And I found out that the theater of the fools, which existed in Norway in the 14th century, because since Hamar, when I talked, I read Kristiansand Dette. I loved it. At the end, it's the time of the plague, and there is this theater mentioned in Norway at the what you call the ting, in the legal, or I don't know what, you know what it is. So what was this theater? It was in the time of the plague in Europe. And it was a political theater at the crossroads in the cities. And the main character, which was meant to attack the abuser, political abuser of the time. Could be the Pope, could be the king, the queen, the mayor, the people who would appear on with official, the director of the museum in Dansk, the new one. People. Pardon?
He's a former boxer.
Okay, so they appear. So they are called soti. The soti is the jester. Jester, judgment. They are called judgment. They are mock trials. And what happens is that the main character is Mother Folly. She appears and she shouts. And then come all the jesters tumbling down and making their art and speaking very quickly, very funny, very witty of the abuse of the time. Suddenly, when it's not expected, like in the story I told you when Mengele went on the stage, they bring the abuser, political abuser, on the stage. And they say all the crimes that he is responsible for. And when nobody expects, they jump on him and rip him from his clothes, from his official, solemn clothes, and they show to everybody that he's a fool. He's dressed like a fool. That means that the perversion is a madness which is dissimulated and controlled. So that is what is that kind of... So I imagined in my book that me, psychoanalyst, was in trial by those patients, like in the Mengele moment. I am accused, and I have to defend myself, and I have to get out of my neutrality, and I have to reach on my side the traumatic, untold events that I may proceed also. So it's a co-research. Jean-Max was saying, the trauma speaks to trauma. How you shall be heard at one condition, that the trauma speaks to the trauma. Because there is a very famous analyst, I love him, I know him very well, Dori Laub, who is one of the great voice for the extreme traumas of the Holocaust. And he always says, those patients, he made video testimonies of the Holocaust at Yale. And he says also, those patients, they always ask, who are you? And if you say, like I did when I was young, I won't tell you, you don't have to know, I'm neutral, they just leave. They are not interested. You can speak only to somebody that knows something of what you have to say. Okay. Now I did not read my paper, so I don't know what it is in it. Okay, I say that. Okay. Now, this is, so first you have to meet someone who knows of those areas, death areas. So history is a major, I am glad historians are here, because, history is a major dimension in our work, but not the history we know, and geography too. But the wholes, what is not written at a very small level, because there are details which has just overcome, lies which have been, I have a lot of stories, but I have no time, which are, as you say, lies which are, truths which are erased. And so there is also geography. When you receive people from immigration, other countries, I always ask I have many people in supervision now, I am old. Where do they come from? Where do they come from? Oh, Africa. It's big, Africa. Where in Africa? And progressively I say, show your patient a map so that he can find his village, because the village is full of names. Like in Savoie, every mountain, every wood, every path has a name. If you are cut from those bearings, you are lost. So maps, and in my supervises, they don't even ask where the people come from next door. They say, oh, they come from province. But in the province, the customs are so different from Paris. And the language is so different. And the traditions are lost, of course. But they come from there. They are exiled from the country. So geography is very important as history, just in order to be precisely locating where some events went into the garbage of history, thrown away, not repressed. There is a big error, confusion in psychoanalysis. They say, oh, it's the return of the repressed. Not at all. It is suppressed. But I'm not the owner of that formula. It was invented by an Englishman, William Rivers, during the First World War, who was a very big neurologist, anthropologist, and a huge healer for veterans coming from the war. So he invented that. It is suppressed. It's not, so we don't deal with the suppressed like with the repressed. The repressed is with lapsus, dreams, signifiers, and so on. The suppressed, there is only surviving images. Okay. So now, what I'm telling you is that we have to cross borders. The borders can be with the immigrants from Africa or Sri Lanka or Asia, but they can be next door. I have seen people in a completely cut out landscape who were coming from a province where people go for tourism, like my country. People go to the Alps. They go skiing, I love it. They go skiing and they do, it's this valley, I'm from this valley where there were the Olympic Games before Lillehammer. So it's very, very prestigious skiing. But I am the witness of the ghosts of people who were tortured, who were caught. Oh, wait a minute, I have a story to tell you. I don't know if I say it, I have time. Yeah, I tell you about one. I did not foresee, but I tell you that story. When I was 8, 10, I was in love with a soldier who did not exist, who had a blue uniform. And every Monday, bicycling, going to school, I was telling my best friend, it was not sexual, it was, my love, the story with that blue soldiers. And as I was a Catholic, I went to confession, say I tell lies, and then they gave absolution, and I started again. And after a while, I don't know, 1 year, I had no more things to say. So I said, it's over. No. Never talked about it to my analyst, who was, by the way, not curious at all of the war. He was curious of the Lacanian theory, but not the war. I was 60. My father was perhaps almost 100, 90. We were in the mountains, and why this day? I say, what did I do when I was 2 and you were meeting with a resistant? What was I doing? For me, it was, again, something normal. I never realized that it was so awkward as a situation. Oh, he said, you are very, very calm, very nice. You had always a book, Don Quixote. It was a drawing book of Don Quixote. I wrote on Don Quixote after, but that's not the problem. And apart to the network of the valley, 2 men came to visit me because we were living in a communal house to make cheese, fruitière we call them, where they make the cheese. So there were many coming and going, easy for the partisans to come and hide in the cellars. So 2 came, they were in a blue uniform. One of them loved you. He was always taking you on his laps. His name was Vitek. He was Jewish. And they were spies in the, Pétain, the horrible man who collaborated at the head of France. They were spies with a blue uniform in a Pétain organization, and they came to our. I greeted them apart from the others, and the others I couldn't tell them that they were in the resistance, so they looked at me suspiciously. This one loved you. He must have had a little child of your age, a little girl of your age. Later on, he said, one day, there was a roundup, a raffle, a roundup, and so a friend came and said, hide, 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 hide. They have taken Vitek, so we know he was with us. So a little later on, says my father, so he just disclosed like that as if it was normal, although he had been completely silent until then. Later on, I learned that he was coming, he would be in the station. He would go through the station. So I went. I saw him between 2 German soldiers, SS. His face was like a bloody meat. I saw his gaze. He looked at me. I looked at him. He's the last one. I was the last he saw, because after they just shot him. And I was thinking, my God, I was, how could I say, I was giving shape to this last gaze. Oh yes, because my father said, and every day I see his gaze. Until he was 100 years old. That's not finished. I was, later on, an American patient brought me a book about a network during the resistance, which at the head was a woman, and they were intelligent, they gave intelligence to the English. And so she had written a book. And at the end, it was a number of names, four pages of names, because they had all been killed in the French concentration camp called Struthof. So I looked like that. His name was there. So he belonged to that network. Third, and I finish on that, I was in Miami, in a conference on the transmission of war from the veterans to their children. And I was like that, talking, and there was a question, and for the first time, I told that story, because it was recent, I think. At the pause, I went to take my coffee. A young girl came, whose name is Deborah. She said, I'm Deborah. My parents are the friends of Vitek's wife. She emigrated to the United States with a boy who is your age. But she said, you know, it's the first time I learned how he died. And probably the little guy, he's no more a little guy, the son does not know, and he's not well. People say to me, go back to the table, go back to the table. So I went, thinking, oh, afterward I will ask her mail, her phone number, her name. She had disappeared. So if you know Deborah, please tell me. I'll stop on that, because it's time, I think. So just a conclusion. Yes, I want to make a conclusion. Oh, yes. I have 2 minutes to make a conclusion. Where is Catherine? I have 2 minutes. I want to tell you a nice story as a conclusion. The story, it's my conclusion, it's a story by François Rabelais, a French author of the Renaissance time, who was a doctor and who writes comic tales on giants. Pantagruel, Gargantua, he's very famous in France, to satirize French society. And at some point, there is something about how shall we hear frozen words? That is the title of the chapter. So the story, how frozen speeches could be heard on the sea. The giant, I read, called Pantagruel, is sailing with his fool, called Panurge, and his soldier, who is a monk. They are on the way of great discoveries, discovering the new world. It's exactly at that moment. Suddenly, the giant hears voices of men, women, children, although he sees nobody. So he opens his ears very large. His fool is terrified. All wonder what happens. The pilot of the boat tells them. Last winter, on the frozen sea, there was a terrible battle. The cries and the speeches of men, women, children, even horses, and the terror of combat were frozen. Now they are melting because it's a good season. At that moment, they see frozen drops of different colors falling on the deck. And they catch them. And as the drops are melting, they hear what they have to say. And the red drops are speeches coming from slitted throats, cutted throats. The other colors, I don't remember what is the connection, but they hear the cannons, the black ones, the cannons. They hear the neighing of horses. They hear the weeping of children and women. And as they melt, and they warm them up in their hand. Then the fool wants to keep them in ice to show them to people. And the giant, in his wisdom, says, no, now they have spoken. We don't have to keep them in ice and keep them eternally. That's not good for them. We have to give testimony of what we heard. So, testimony, I think, is a good word, as well as witness, when we speak of secrets. Because telling secrets is, I have just a little other story. Telling secrets is not something you debrief on a microphone or that you just write down. Telling secrets is a process, a long process. This title, Telling Secrets, is a title of an article of an Indian, American Indian, Athapaskan, whom I met in Manitoba. He gave me this article. Telling secrets is what they do when some youngsters are disturbed. They send them to the bush, the wild space of the mythological spirits, where they stay during the night, completely terrified, seeing things, hearing things. In the Middle Age, the wild space of the forest, of the mountains, was the place for the fool. So it's exactly that. They come back and they tell what happened. But they don't tell, giving the secret to everybody. They tell to an elder who has dreamt about them. They give their story in the frame of the traumatic dream of an elder. It's exactly what I told you in the beginning. You don't tell somebody in an objective way. Secrets are not to be taken objectively. They tell them in an articulation, a first knitting, or a first text, or a first weaving of a story with another. And then, that is the conclusion, little by little, the secrets of childhood become the wealth of the community. They become myths. But this comes little by little, not right away. I stop there. Thank you.